G'day everyone and welcome back to the Big Swing Noting podcast, sending those bales back to New South Wales since 2019. Yes, I know, we're back. You don't have to tell me, I'm making the video. I know. No explanation why we're back. We just are. Hopefully there'll be some videos coming out soon for you to enjoy or just not watch or listen to entirely. But big reason why we are back is because David Warner is very interesting and he could possibly be getting dropped from the Australian Test team soon-ish, or it seems that his Test career is in its twilight era, to say the very least. And for me, at least, it's quite a shock to the system because pretty much all my cricketing memories have David Warner somewhere thereabouts around them. Like, he's always been in all formats of the game for pretty much all my time that I've consciously been watching cricket and actually understanding what's going on. I can't quite remember his debut. It was probably a couple years before I started properly watching cricket, but nevertheless, I feel like I've sort of seen him as like a young player and now fully developed, and now he's like a veteran and about to retire. Like that boggles my mind, right? But there's been a lot of scrutiny around his position and around David Warner just as a person and what's going on. I don't want to get into the personal stuff with him. He's been through way too much of all of that, and I don't feel like any human beings should be subject to so much abuse when he hasn't really done like anything untoward at all. I mean, yeah, like I know he used sandpaper, or he told Bancroft to use sandpaper in 2019, but I think we're pretty much past that, and it's not really that big of a deal at this point in time. But yeah, so I don't want to touch on any of that personal stuff. If that's your take on Dave Warner, then that is what it is. I'm not going to be the one that's going to change that for you. But what I do want to talk about, and what we talk about on this show, is cricket and how the skills are, and mainly selection, because selection is the most interesting part of cricket. The most interesting part of cricket is when cricket isn't happening. Doesn't make any sense, but that's just how it is, right? Now, the big player in the shadows, if you like, for the Australian public and for the Australian opening position in place of Dave Warner is Matt Renshaw, and we're going to get back into him a little bit later. We're going to deep dive into what his position actually might look like, but what we need to ask ourselves right now is Dave Warner in the best two opening batsmen in this country? And yes, he is averaging... Well, actually, let me just get my stats out real quick, because we shouldn't just be looking at home averages right now. We should be looking at away averages, Asia averages, and English averages, because ultimately, in the next year, not even the next year, the next 7 months, we are touring India, we're touring England for the Ashes, and we are probably like 80% likely to be in the World Test Championship final at Lord's. So you have to have players that are equipped to those conditions. And I know over the last 2 years, Australia's policy hasn't really been hasn't been this horses for courses policy, right? Maybe a little bit if you look at last year's Ashes when they picked like Scott Boland for the MCG test. Did not pick that coming. And they picked Jai and Nisa. I know that was kind of forced, but they nevertheless still picked them for the pink ball tests. They haven't really done like any of the horses for courses stuff throughout this year in terms of batting. Well, not just this year, throughout pretty much as long as I can remember in terms of batting and who's going to play the swing and the spin accordingly. And for as good as David Warner has been, like, we shouldn't discount, like, let me preface everything I say in this episode. Dave Warner is an Australian opening legend. He has revolutionised white ball cricket we'll say T20 cricket, and I remember when he first hit the scene in a T20, well, I don't remember it happening, but I know that this did happen. When he hit the scene as a T20 international debut, and it took him a few years before he got stuck into Test cricket, people didn't really think that he was a Test player, but we now can look back on it a little bit, and I'm not going to say he was the one that started all this, because you can go back to like Viv Richards, Adam Gilchrist is another pioneer that comes to mind of aggressive Test batsmen. But you look at the way like Bazball was happening right now, Dave Warner would be able to fit into that pretty nicely, I think. So what he has done for Australian cricket, and like he averages 57 with the bat in test matches at home. Not even going to get into his white ball statistics because we all know how good they are. He's been probably the most successful, I want to say the most successful Australian in the IPL over the years. So, and that's another one off the list. And he's been a staple, right, in times where there's been a lot of players coming in and out the doors in Australian cricket, which always seems to be the case. But nevertheless, he's been a staple there for over a decade now. So props to Dave Warner for having an awesome career. Reality is, he's 36 now. I don't necessarily believe that we should be dropping... Oh, I think he's 36 at least, or maybe he's 34. 36 seems a bit old. He's old, right? But nevertheless, I'd say I don't think you should be dropping someone just because they are old. But when that age starts to show and when they start to really slow down and they are actually hindering the team, that's when I believe questions do need to be raised. Within reason, because players like Dave Warner have such an incredible track record, with an asterisk, and I'll get into that, have such an incredible track record that you do need to back them. And coming off the Ashes in 2019 in England, where he averaged 9.5 across 5 tests, there was a 50 in the middle of those, so that's why he didn't get dropped. There was a lot of talk about him coming into the Pakistan summer, or the Pakistan series, and was it the first test or the second test, he made 335 not out. So you do have to back players of Warner's capabilities and caliber to a certain degree, and I feel like that's kind of what's keeping him going at this sort of stage, and that is why I could see him still playing all the way to the Ashes next year and whatnot. So I'm going to now read out Dave Warner's averages and numbers in Asia, in India, and in England, because that's really what we're looking for right now. So we know, as I said just before, he averages 57 at home. He's been unbelievable here for a long, long time. There's still 2 tests to go in the Australian test match summer, so we should be looking at those first. However, I don't think we necessarily need him to absolutely fire to his maximum if we are to win this test series, which I would think Australia will win this series. I would say I'm gonna give South Africa. Am I gonna give South Africa at the SCG? No, I'm not gonna give them because that'll be a road. I'm going to say 3-0 Australia. Could be 2-1 then. It won't be a draw. That's going to come back and bite me, isn't it? Anyway, though, I feel like that should be low on the priorities list, but nevertheless, we do have to look at it right now. So that's probably what's going to keep him in the team to the end of this summer. I would be very surprised if we dropped him before the end of this series, because, I mean, that would be one more match, right? And frankly, I just don't think he's quite been that shocking enough to, like, completely take him away and see all of that stuff he's achieved before and just say, nope, not good enough, we're moving on. But in England, he averages 26.04 and he has 750s there from 25 innings. Now, those obviously aren't good numbers. 26 with the bat is not good enough, especially when you're supposed to be the premier batsman or the premier top order, the premier opener, and you're supposed to be one of these senior leaders of this batting lineup. So I don't think you can use that in Warner's favour at all, and I think that's pretty widely regarded. But before that, we go to, and so we're playing 5 tests in the Ashes, plus hopefully a World Test Championship final. So that's 6 matches there where you're playing an opener who averages 26 in those conditions. And you're either going to be playing England, well, you are going to be playing England in the Ashes, and you're most likely going to be playing South Africa in the Test Championship final, or you might be playing India. Both of which have extremely potent bowling attacks, pace bowling attacks. And those are the ones that swing it. Like, honestly, if we play South Africa and England, we could very well lose. The way they can swing and move the ball. Obviously, we don't need to talk about how potent England's seam bowlers are, because that's very well known. And if you're playing 6 tests against that caliber, that's a hindrance, and I'm not sure that you can really keep persisting with a player that's averaging 26 in those conditions if he does not fire beforehand. So these two tests are really important for Dave Warner to actually make sure that he cements himself there. In India, that's where we're going beforehand. I think it's 4 tests there, and then after this it'll be 5 tests, or maybe it's 5 tests already. He averages 24 in India, and in Asia he averages 33 with... Okay, he's got 3 test centuries in Asia, which is not that bad. From 39 innings, you would expect a little bit better. 33.5 average in Asia isn't abysmal, but in India, it's 74.25 with only 350s from 16 innings. So both of which, like, a lot of talk has been made of Warner's performance in England and against the swinging ball. But if you flip that again and go to spinning conditions and hopeless spinning conditions, like there are going to be dust balls in Asia, right? Or in India, I should say. Whatever. It's about the same. His weakness is about the same as I just read out. He's got about the same number of runs, about the same number of average. So you really need Warner to completely fire in these 2 tests if you're going to keep him in this team. Because yes, he has the basic numbers to back it up to keep him in the team with his average of 46-ish or whatever, and however many runs he scored. But do those runs become somewhat obsolete if you then go to completely different conditions where he doesn't have the numbers to back it up? In my opinion, they do become somewhat obsolete. Obviously, you know the Warner class is still there, and if you have a road by some miraculous chance, well, actually, it's not quite miraculous, because the way England have been playing with the bat, you might get a flat deck in England. In that case, it might be okay to play Dave Warner, but you're very, very unlikely to get that in India. It's probably... It might be flat and good for batting, but it's still going to be spinning and still going to be turning right angles in day 4 and day 5, where you still need your opener to score runs again, because it's probably not going to be that much time in the test. So if you have a guy that's averaging 26 and 28 in those conditions, I don't think you can persist with that, even if his home average is 57. So that is everything that works against Dave Warner, and that's why I'm not... Look, I'm not coming for his head like a lot of the Australian public are. I'm generally quite reserved with dropping players, but when it comes to Dave Warner's record and it comes to what we're looking ahead, because Australian cricket, like, these are the 2 big ones: a tour to India, a tour to England, and now we've got the Test Championship final, which will hopefully be big in a few years' time. And I think it's still somewhat of a big deal-ish, kind of. I think it'll grow eventually, and maybe it'll get reformatted a little bit. But, like, this is what you want. These are the big, big things. The pinnacle of Test match success is to win in India and to win in England, for Australia at least. So, if you're going to take players that are going to hinder that, I'm not a big backer. So, what we need to sort of realize is, all right, what are the alternatives? Well, the big one that's always come up is Matt Renshaw. Now, Matt Renshaw, obviously, he's played tests a few times. He came back into the test team very momentarily, very briefly, I should say. Fumbling over my words. He came back into the test team very briefly in the wake of Sandpapergate when Warner got banned and whatnot. And then he also came in that home summer, I think, for a test against Sri Lanka, or maybe it was 2 tests, I'm not sure. He was in thereabouts, right? So he's played, I think, about 3 tests since he got dropped from the team in about 2016-ish. So it's all very interesting, because what the Australian public will think of is, oh, Matt Renshaw scored that 180 against, I think it was against Pakistan, and he held firm against South Africa in a day-night test where we brought in like 3 young players, and it worked out pretty well at the time. But I'm really not convinced on Matt Renshaw. Is he a bad batsman? No, definitely not. And he's still like only 24, right? So he still has probably got growth to go. But what I'm not convinced upon is if Renshaw is your best option, he's not going to be a guy that's going to be able to score you 50s every other match or every 3 matches and score that 100. Which Warner, even though like his lows are pretty low, his highs are monumentally high. So I'm not sure Renshaw has the same monumentous heights as Dave Warner. So if you are picking Matt Renshaw, it is more of a stopgap, because I don't feel like he's going to be that bad, but he's not going to be great either. Like, he's probably only going to score you about 30-ish runs on average, right? And I think that's about where his test average is right now. So if you're picking Matt Renshaw to be that guy, it's more of just dropping Warner. It's not picking Renshaw. And if that's what you want, is to just get Warner out of the team, why are you actually doing that if you're not getting someone that's going to really boost your returns? For me, at least, I don't think it's really worth it. Like, we look across Renshaw's stats that I've just written down here. Across the last 2 Sheffield Shield seasons, he has scored 2 centuries. 2. Now, provided one this year was a double 100, and that does count for something. And I think he scored 100 for what was basically an Australia A team. So he can definitely score the runs. However, I'm pretty sure that was against the West Indies team, which we saw in the end didn't really hold up in the Australian conditions, which was a great shame. But you've got 3 centuries across 2 years, right? And we look at these averages this year. So Renshaw in conjunction with those 2 centuries, he's also only scored 2 50s against those 2 seasons. So we're talking only 4 times has he passed 50 in the last 2 seasons of Sheffield Shield. Now, his numbers aren't bad. I'm not trying to diminish Renshaw as a player, but what I am trying to say to you is that Renshaw is not like someone you should be holding up in like these blinding lights that are, he's the savior, because he's not. He's just been decent. And to really constitute picking yourself for an Australian Test side, you really need to be making runs. You need to force yourself to be picked. And he averages 50 in Shield this year, but that is a little bit fudged by not outs, as I said before, with a 200 not out. And again, you do have to give credit because he still scored 200 not out, right? So you still have to give benefit to that, or give your props to that, because he still scored a 200. But because that was not out, that does fudge his average a little bit, and that's why it was 50 instead of maybe being about 43, I think it should be. Renshaw is also number 11 on the Sheffield Shield run scorers and is a long way behind Peter Handscomb at the moment, and we're only at the halfway point. So it's like you're 300 or so runs behind Peter Handscomb as the leading run scorer, 11th in the total comp, and you're like the next man up for the Test team. For me personally, I'm not buying it. I'm not convinced that he's going to be a guy that you want to hold in the Test team for that long, because the whole idea of picking a 24-year-old and you're dumping Dave Warner, who's 35, 36 years old, right, is for a long-term solution. You're looking for someone who's going to win you matches in the future. You're looking for someone who can be the Rock. Renshaw is not the Rock. I really hate to say that, because like I don't know anyone that doesn't like Matt Renshaw, right? But at the present moment, he is not the Rock. And quite frankly, I'm getting a little bit unconvinced if he is going to be that. So as I said, he averages 50 in Sheffield Shield this year, and he averaged 29 in the Sheffield Shield season before that. Like, again, if you're picking a Test opener at that, like not just a Test batsman, a Test opener, you want them to have authority. You want them to be dominating. Average of 50 this season, great. Like, that's cool if you're doing it across a few seasons. It's nothing like unbelievable, but 50 across a few seasons, that would definitely constitute picking, even if there's a 200 not out there slightly fudging the results. But if you're averaging 29 the season before that, you've only got 2 centuries across 2 years to show for yourself. Again, I don't think that's enough. And I hate saying it. I really hate saying it, but I feel like that could just be the best that Matt Renshaw is at this point in time, is I'll score 30 or 35 runs for the Test team. And that's okay, I guess. But you think about like the highs of Dave Warner, like even though he doesn't have that extreme record in Asia, as I just said, you still know he's got that behind him. You know he's got the match-winning ability behind him. And he's won white ball matches in India and in England before. So I personally would value that higher than Matt Renshaw's 11th highest runs in the comp this year, 19th the year before, and 15th the year before that. And in that season, or maybe it was the year before that, he actually got dropped from Queensland. Now, I'm not saying Renshaw is bad or that he's a low-quality batsman, but if you're getting dropped from Queensland team and then you rebound, like he's still only, at the time he was only like 22 years old or 23 years old, so he still had a lot of time to grow, and he probably needed that reset. But when you rebound, you come back into the domestic scene, you want to show you like that you've learnt, you want to show a lot of promise. And he's been good, but he's just been a good domestic player and not much more. And really, this season has actually been the first in a couple years that he hasn't been in the middle order. He's only been opening this year. That's the only year. The previous years he's been in number 4, number 3. The year before that, I think he was opening, and that's when he got dropped. So it's like, that's just it's a lot of expectations and a lot of love for a guy who's just sort of good. He's decent. And I really hate saying that, but that's probably just the reality of what Matt Renshaw is at the moment. So we look at the alternatives, right? So alternative batsmen you'll probably hear are Henry Hunt and Bryce Street are the two big names. Bryce Street has played one first-class match this year for Queensland. It doesn't make any sense why Queensland aren't picking him. If this was last year, because he turned for Australia A against England, which is no mean feat, right? You still got a ton against England. Like, their bowling attack is still good. He keeps making runs. He keeps holding firm as well. Bryce Street is a good player of spin. I wouldn't say he's an exceptional player of spin, but he's a good player of spin. He holds very firm, he holds well, and he can score that 100. But even if he doesn't, that 50 or so that he is more reliably going to make digs in, and it takes a lot out of the ball, out of the bowler. So he's a really good guy to have alongside, say, an Usman Khawaja, who's going to play his shots against the spin and he's going to score runs. I feel like that would be a good combination, but for some reason, Queensland just aren't picking Bryce Street this year after he was their leading run scorer over the last 3 years. I don't get it, but that's just how it is. So I don't think you can pick Bryce Street just because of what's been going on this season with him. Doesn't make any sense to me, but that's just where he's sitting at the moment. And maybe there's some interior issue, or there's been something going on that the public just doesn't know about, because I cannot fathom why you would pick Jack Clayton over Bryce Street, even if he's in the middle order. As I said, you can put Renshaw back to number 4. You can put Joe Burns to number 4. He's been batting there a lot. Usman Khawaja opens the batting for Australia, and he bats number 3 for Queensland, right? Like, I don't quite understand what Queensland are doing with their top order. But maybe there's something else that the public doesn't know yet. In which case, I hold my reservations, and then Bryce Street is potentially an option. But given what we've seen this year, I don't think Bryce Street can seriously be considered for an India tour. Could he for an Ashes tour? Perhaps, if he plays his second part of the Shield season, which I think is going to go through the India tour, and he scores runs there, then yeah, I could definitely see him playing in the Ashes in England. And we know how well he plays against the seaming ball and how well he plays swing. Because, like, obviously, he's an opener that digs in. He can definitely play it. He can definitely watch it. So, I would be comfortable, and I could definitely see a world where he debuts in England. Could I see one in India? Probably not. Other options. Henry Hunt. So, what I'm going to do is, when I'm going through these alternatives, is think about how well they fit the dynamic of the Australian batting team, and how well they fit what we actually want to achieve over the next year or so. So, Henry Hunt is probably the leading... he is the leading run scorer in terms of openers for the last 3 or 4 Sheffield Shield years. So, and I think he's about 25-ish, maybe? 25, 26. So, he's still fairly young. He's still got some growth to go. I don't think Henry Hunt is ever going to be like a dominant world-class batsman, but I could definitely see him just being a good, like a good partner to Usman Khawaja for a little bit, or until we find something a little bit better. Maybe until Teague Wiley starts opening, or until Sam Fanning gets going. That's probably, or until Will Pucovski gets his body right, and we'll talk about Pucovski a little bit later. So I think Henry Hunt's ceiling isn't that high, but I feel like his floor is pretty high. So I know this is kind of counterintuitive to what I just said about Renshaw, how he's probably only going to score you like 28-30. That's going to be around his average. Henry Hunt, I feel like his average could be about 40 or maybe a tick under 40, which I think is good. That's a good option when you're not sure about where your opener partner is going. So we take for granted what Dave Warner has achieved, and we take for granted, like, we've had Steve Smith, we've had some, and we talk about openers, like literally Langer and Hayden, like it keeps going and going and going. We've been pretty blessed at the top of the order. So if we're just waiting for the next one to arrive, I think it's perfectly fine to have someone who averages like 38 to 41. Like those are still pretty decent numbers, and Travis Head has played a lot of his Test career with those numbers. Chris Rogers, I'm pretty sure, only averaged like 37 or 36 for a lot of his Test career, and we looked at him at the time, we look back on him now as well and go, damn, he was pretty good and he did his role. I feel like Henry Hunt could be that sort of Chris Rogers type. We talk about his playing to spin. If you look, and it's hard to get a judge because the Sheffield Shield spin stocks aren't very good at all. It's very dependent on who's available at the time and whatnot and what the pitches are. But over the last 2 seasons, Henry Hunt has only been dismissed by spin in the Sheffield Shield twice. And both those times, he had scored 100 already. So I'm personally confident in Henry Hunt's ability to play spin. Is he an exceptional player of spin? No, but he's a good player of spin. So I can definitely see him playing in India if Warner does not fire in these 2 last tests against South Africa. And I think there'll be a couple Shield matches before we go to India, so I feel like that's when Henry Hunt's time is. Other options, you got Tim Ward is like at the top of the Sheffield, or he's at like the top 5 of the Sheffield Shield run scorers at the moment. I don't quite think Ward is ready. He's just sort of he's been a little bit fortuitous, if I may say, with his scenarios and when he gets to make his runs and how he gets to bat. I think Ward is a very solid batsman, but I feel like this is probably a little bit too early, even though he is 24. He's only played like a season total of Sheffield Shield. So I think it's probably a little bit too early for Tim Ward. He also hasn't tonned this year. He made a couple tons last season, I think, and he was again in that top 5-6 range of run scorers. But I don't think Tim Ward is an international quality caliber just yet, or if his ceiling is really at its high. I think he's a good domestic player. The other option, like his teammate Caleb Jewell is making runs sometimes for Tasmania. I don't really know what to think about Caleb Jewell. Sometimes he looks like he could, be the next big thing for opening batsmen in Australia, but he just shows it on such rare occasions. And it's so well spaced apart. Like I can't really invest in him just yet. I need to see a more consistent product. Now this is where we get into some more left field options. But Sam Whiteman as well. He keeps making runs at the top. Again, I feel like he's a good player of seam, and he plays the swinging ball well. So I wouldn't mind him being like a stopgap for the Ashes. I'm not convinced over his spinning playing ability and how well that'll hold up against an international caliber attack like India when you've got Axar Patel, Ravichandran Ashwin, and Ravindra Jadeja. Now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing we have no chance anyway. So I don't know. We'll see how that one all goes out. Left field options. Will Pucovski. Will Pucovski, man. I can't believe we're having this Will Pucovski discussion again. It's such a shame, but hey, it is what it is, and I hope that he's getting his head back on the right track. And all love to Will Pucovski around these parts at least. So if Will Bukowski were to come back in the Sheffield Shield second half of this season, I don't think it would take very much at all for him to get on the tour, get on the plane to India and get on the plane as a follow-up to the Ashes. So if Will Bukowski were to score a century in like his first 2 Sheffield Shield games coming back, or if he were to score multiple, I don't like. It would not take much for Will Bukowski to get there. He's a great player of spin, even better player of pace. I know a lot of people don't think he plays pace that well because of his concussion history. He's only been hit in the head like 3 times from actual bounces, right? Most of the concussion stuff is just freak incidents. And you think about general test players, Steve Smith gets hit in the head all the time. Marnus Labuschagne, one of the first balls of the 19 Ashes, he got hit in the head, right? He was fine. But it's just because different players are more susceptible to them. So that's why people think Will Bukowski isn't a good player of pace. Could not be further from the truth. He's an excellent player of pace. And in England, I don't think they're likely to get the short ball out that much unless Jofra Archer is miraculously just back by then and he combines with Mark Wood. But I find that probably on the more unlikely end. But similarly unlikely is Will Bukowski being there. So we'll see, hey. But he's a bit of a left field option at the moment. If he can just get himself on the pitch and he's happy and he's comfortable with himself, which of course is the most important thing, then I could definitely see him being boarded on the plane. The last option here, and this is proper rogue. So please be prepared. This is very, very rogue. And I think this actually came from my friend Adnan. So I can't take complete credit for this, but when he said it, it made complete sense to me. Maybe I did say it, but I can't even remember at this point, but I'm pretty sure it was him. Travis Head as an opener. Before you click off this video, let me talk. So, Peter Handscomb is the best domestic batsman in Australia right now, and has been for the last 2 years. Everyone knows he is probably the best domestic player of spin in the country, right? There's not many better that play it well and play it on the back feet, going around in the Sheffield Shield circuit right now. So I would definitely be in favour of Peter Handscomb playing in India. In England, no, but in India, sure. So what I would be looking for is, okay, how can we fit Peter Handscomb into that middle order? What I would like to say is Travis Head is not a good player of spin, and I really worry for his career at some point. If he tours India, if he toured Sri Lanka this year, he was not good there. Pakistan, he didn't get to bat that much, was not good there. So I worry about his welfare, I guess, and his place in the team if he were to play an extended series in India, right? Regardless of how good his batting has been at home over the last 2 or 3 years, right? Because it has been really good. But that is extremely dependent on pace and full-length balls. So I would be tempted to take Travis Head out of that middle order position batting at number 5. Because by the time you get to number 5 in Asia, the spinners are bowling for the rest of the day. So if you put Travis Head on to combine with Usman Khawaja at the top of the order, because Usman Khawaja is a great player of spin, I definitely think he's the option for opening going forward, even if he is kind of old now. So if you put Travis Head alongside him, Head plays the swinging ball pretty well, I think. He's opened a lot in white ball cricket. He's the current Australia ODI opener, and he's done pretty well. And every time he has been an ODI opener, he has pretty much made the spot his own until they just randomly dropped him one tour, like 5 years ago. But what I think we really forget sometimes is how aggressively Travis Head plays that swinging new ball, or just pace bowling in general these days. And if you come on in India, it's day one, the deck is still dusty and it's still gonna spin, but it's still pretty good for batting on day one, typically in India. You're gonna get Bumrah, you're gonna get Umesh Yadav, what the heck? You're gonna get Bumrah, probably gonna get Siraj or Shami on the other hand, right? And those guys are going to be coming at you on the body. So how do you counter that? Because what a lot of teams sort of forget when they tour India is that India have a really good pace attack, but they just sort of don't really use it. They all prepare for the spin, and then they just sort of get dismantled early by the seam, and then they're trying to rebuild when the spinners come on, by which time Jadeja and Ashwin just clean them up, or more recently Axar Patel. So that's why I feel like we do still need those good players of seam, but you need to be able to play them at the appropriate moment. They're going to be taking the new ball early. If Travis Head is good for like 40 or so runs at a runner ball, and then he gets out to the spin later, honestly, that's pretty good. That's a good return, because I don't feel like you're going to be getting more than about 25 runs from him at number 5. If that, especially on a rank turner at like day 5. So if he is being proactive, he's being aggressive, he can put some pressure on the Indian pacers early and then force the spinners come on with a newish ball, which is still going to be sliding a little bit, and that is going to suit him even more. I would not... Look, this is probably not going to happen. I would say it's almost definitely not going to happen. But because Travis Head has been in such good form, you can't really drop him for the subcontinent, even though he's a pretty bad player of spin in red ball cricket. So you still want to be able to utilise him to some degree. Put him at the top of the order and just say, hey, just go for it. So that's my preferred solution. Is it the most realistic? Definitely not. But that's personally what I would be going for. Renshaw has toured Asia before. He did okay, I guess. He didn't do anything spectacular, but he wasn't really spectacular at all in his test career. He did well against Pakistan, I guess, but nothing like amazing. So it's like, I guess Renshaw would be able to score 30-ish or so in Asia, and that's not terrible, because like we look at Dave Warner's history in Asia, and we look, like I just read it out, in India he averages 25 or whatever. So you need something that's going to be able to give more to that, because now he's in bad form as well. Most of the times he's toured India, he's been in ripping form off the home summer. Now he's in his own head, there's questions over his plays, his retirement is beckoning. I wouldn't be surprised if that average drops way below 20 if he were to play the full India series. So that's just a thought. George Bailey, give me a call if you want selection tips. But I wouldn't be too hesitant to just have a look at what it looks like for even a test or two. Then you can go to Renshaw, you can go back to Warner, or Henry Hunt. As I said, he plays spin pretty decently, but I'm worried about what his spin against, his ability against like actual quality spinners would look like. But nevertheless, we'll see what it looks like. So ultimately, should Dave Warner be dropped? That's the question everyone wants to know. This is my answer. Yes. At the end of this series, though. And that's a very, it's a confronting statement if, like, he scores 100 in this next test. I don't think he will, because... Oh, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he does in Sydney, though. Maybe he does in Sydney, because I know everyone says that, the SCG is good for spin, because it's not a drop-in wicket. But really, it's just kind of good for batting. But this South Africa attack is just so potent that I don't feel like you're going to be able to score that many runs anyway. So, particularly with how well they've been bowling to Warner and all that stuff. So, I would be in favour of dropping Dave Warner at the end of this series, provided he doesn't score a massive 100 at Boxing Day. Maybe you say, hey, we're not gonna play you after this. Here's your chance to retire, or you can go out being half in the team. If he wants to extend his test career till next summer, and try and ton against the Windies and Pakistan next summer, I would get that. But I feel like George Bailey and the selectors will be saying to him, hey, your spot is not guaranteed for the English Ashes and for the Tour of India. So it's up to you. Yeah. What's my ideal replacement? Travis Head at the top of the order and then Hanscom in there. And then what does that look like come England Ashes time? I don't really know. I would love if Bryce Street was there, but what his Queensland situation looks like at the moment remains to be seen. Otherwise, I feel like Henry Hunt's probably the best all-round solution that Australian opening has. And I know I didn't say Renshaw. You can come and eat me. That's all right. Anyway, that's what we're gonna say. Hope you all enjoyed this Big Swing Noting podcast on David Warner and should he be in the test team. Let me know what you think. Give me a comment down below. Be sure to rate us if you're on iTunes or Google Podcasts and Spotify, all down below, and check us out on YouTube if you're on audio. All right, thanks very much. Play it through.